This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com in review. What I'm looking at today is 2023's Indigo, directed by Rahi Soraya. I really enjoy horror movies, and I try to take in as many as I can from as different places as I can. Which is to say, I've seen horror movies from Ireland, I've seen horror movies from Britain, I've seen horror movies from France, I've seen horror movies from a lot of places. And that's important to me because the culture of a place is reflected in its cinema. That's not to say it's an accurate reflection. More often than not, far from it. But it is a reflection. And I think it's important to see what other people are doing. And for the past few months, I've been trying to find Indonesian horror films that I think I would like. It's not that the ones I have seen, relatively few admittedly, are bad. More so than they're not really particularly scary. They also tend to be very reserved in their portrayal of violence. And heck, I'm an American, I love violence. It's almost in our DNA, I sometimes think. So I'm not a huge fan of Indonesian horror. But a few months ago, I did a trailer reaction to an Indonesian horror film. And quite a few people recommended some Indonesian horror films that I should take a look at. And one of them was Indigo. Indigo is very well done visually. The special effects are good. It looks like a movie. And that sounds like an insult, but it's really not, because trust me, some movies do not. It sounds like a small hurdle to clear, but it's more difficult than you think. As I mentioned earlier, culture is reflected in cinema. No matter the genre, you're going to get a glimpse into the mores of people in that particular place. And this is the reason I suspect that Indonesian horror isn't particularly violent, or at least I should say the horror films from Indonesia I have seen aren't particularly violent. They're reflecting a culture which frowns upon such things. And the people who make the films, being Indonesian, can't help but become suffused with it. So Indigo falls into this cultural valley, which for me makes it difficult to really get into. The story revolves around these two sisters, and one of them happens to be an indigo, which I think is a person who's able to see and speak to and interact with spirits. And when I say spirits, I mean demons, ghosts, whatever. They can interact with it. The movie begins with a little girl named Zora, and she's being threatened by an entity who will be identified as Wadiri, but at this point they don't know who she is. And she's trying to take this little girl to possess her, I assume. And so another indigo named Sakar comes and makes Zora forget that she was an indigo. And Wadiri, the entity, just moves on. Zora's younger sister is eventually targeted by Wadiri. And to save her, Zora tries to get back her indigo ability. And so when her abilities are restored, Wadiri directs her energies towards her. As I mentioned already, there's a lot going on with this movie. For instance, these indigos. The movie gives you relatively little information about them, and you have to guess based upon context. And that becomes tiring. Not that they should have done an exposition dump, but something to let us know how these indigos came to be and what their whole point is. Because having watched the movie, I would have done away with them entirely. They are not essential to the plot. And by my reckoning, their presence only makes it more cluttered. I say get rid of them. I would. I just don't understand why they're that important. Sakar is an indigo, but she's also an exorcist. I'm not making this up, there's just way too much going on in this movie. And her husband died assisting her exorcise an entity. Later in the movie, her daughter dies, assisting her exorcising an entity. Her son is kind of pissed off at her And he is bitter because, I don't know, his dad is dead. And eventually his sister is going to die helping his mother. Though he eventually enters the family business as well. This is maddening. Why would you do that? And in fact, why is Sakar doing that? She has lost 2 members of her family, yet she continues to do this. It doesn't make any sense to me. At some point, I imagine you have to cut your losses. I don't know, maybe after the first death. But that's just me. The movie becomes way too heavy with backstory of characters. For instance, we get the origin of Wadiri, the entity that is haunting this family. And that's not an unimportant thing. It's good that Rocky Soraya gave us context for why this entity is doing what it's doing. Though the problem with this context is that it makes the entity warranted in its violence towards this family and its children. It's the weirdest thing. You end up almost rooting for this demon. And I know it's trying to possess this girl and it's evil and so on, but it makes sense that it would think like this. Its reasoning is really good, which undermines your support for the people who are supposedly the good guys. It is very strange. Well, by the way, I should mention that Zora's ancestors were doing the evil that they did to build a fortune and to be rich and powerful. So once again, you end up kind of rooting for Wadiri. Now Wadiri is terrible, but the movie gives you this Sophie's choice of options here. So it's just really odd. It's like watching The Nun, which is not a great movie by the way, and rooting for the nun. Another thing is that everyone seems connected somehow to Zora and Wadiri. For instance, the movie goes back in time with Aska, who is Zora's boyfriend, and we meet his ancestor. And his ancestor was killed by someone in Zora's family as well. It's just maddening with the flashbacks. It's almost as if Rocky Soraya thought everything in his movie was precious. Therefore, he couldn't cut a thing. And if you're directing a movie and you have that feeling, something is very wrong. And you need someone else to come in and look at it with an unbiased eye. Because this movie was woefully in need of cuts. Big time. And I don't mean necessarily cuts in the film itself. I mean cuts starting from the script. Just remove stuff. Get rid of it if it doesn't serve the purpose of the main narrative. I've oftentimes complained about movies that are so transparent the script shows through. And there's one scene in this movie that is an epitome of that tendency. Zora is being chased by an entity, not Wadiri, it's another one entirely. And she's in her art studio, and she runs to an elevator. Oh, I should mention, by the way, also, that this building is not very tall. I think it's 3 stories. In any case, she runs to the elevator. Entity's pursuing her, makes a beeline to another corridor. Now, the problem with the scene is that she literally runs by a staircase to get to the elevator that goes down, as in to the 2nd floor, and then to the 1st floor, and then to the entrance. Why are you taking an elevator in a building that only has 3 floors? Take the fucking stairs. Why are you, it's just frustrating to watch. Now keep in mind, that's not to say that she would have escaped had she taken the stairs. But taking the stairs was the most logical thing to do. Because the elevator wasn't just sitting there with its doors open waiting. She had to actually push the button and wait while this entity is closing in on her, when she could have just easily have run down the stairs. It would have made sense. And you can write how, let's say, she's unable to open the doors. Fine. but don't have her wait for the elevator. It was just beyond silly. Another weird thing about Indigo is that for a movie that's talking about exorcisms and possession and things of that nature, a Bible never once, not even once, makes an appearance in the movie. Why does that matter? It matters because you're talking about something that is looking from, supposedly, a Christian point of view. You're talking about God. You're talking about the devil. You're talking about demons. You're talking about ghosts. I don't know what the principal religion of Indonesia is, but the movie is talking about Christianity, or at least it's using the idea of Christianity to tell its story. Yet it never seems to really understand Christianity. As I said, a Bible doesn't even make an appearance at all. And when characters are referring to God, be the characters good or bad, they just do so in a very mundane fashion. It's like, once again, the people who wrote this have never read a Bible. And that's cool, but don't structure your story in such a way where understanding what the Bible says and understanding what Christianity is about is important. Make that a minor detail so that you don't have to stress it. Indigo never does, but it comes off really odd because it doesn't. It's like William Friedkin's The Exorcist never talking about Catholic theology. You would wonder what the hell is wrong with this movie, and it would be a lesser movie for it. You can't avoid that when you're dealing with subject matter in this fashion. I don't think Indigo is a bad movie. As I said earlier, it's well shot, it looks great, but it just makes too many errors to be really enjoyable. It's overlong, there are way too many subplots, and if you're going to evoke God and the devil, at least have a grasp of the Bible, or have a religious consultant on the set, someone who will help flesh out the ideas introduced by Rocky Soraya and his co-writer. Someone to have this gel better. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.